Steffavella writes, I would like to know more about trapped whitespace. I've seen you mention it once or twice, and would like to see more examples so I know how I can avoid it. Glittergirl, can you help Steffavella get it right with all things white?
Of course I can. I'm going to start with something a little bit different today to try and explain the design principle of white space. And there are two things I want to make sure that we all have on the same page before we even get started on explaining the design principle. Number one is that white space does not have to be white. It just happens to be whatever of the background you're seeing. So on a 12 by 12 page, whatever of that's solid sheet that you have that's still 12 by 12, whatever color or pattern that might be, that's usually what we're talking about when we come to white space. It might be that it is white because you started with a sheet of white cardstock, but it also might be a different color, or it might even be a pattern paper. You can certainly have white space and have a pattern paper, even though that seems a little counterintuitive. The other concept that you need to make sure you have in your mind is that white space isn't always bad. Some white space is really, really important. And white space just means that we need to have something on the page that's not embellished, something that doesn't have layers over the top, somewhere that we can see that background. So some of that is really required, and that's really good white space. And then there's white space that creates awkward gaps that are unsettling to the eye. So I find the easiest way to understand what white space is useful and what white space is complicated or awkward comes from looking at the design that we know as a newspaper page. So I've taken a sheet of cardstock and cut it into boxes to mimic the way we would set out the front page of a newspaper. So if you imagine this box up here has things like the date and usually the price. Then you get this big banner across the whole page, which has the name of the newspaper. Sometimes banners are smaller and they might just put the newspaper name on part of it and then have, what's inside on the other half. But this whole unit is always designed kind of as one whole piece, and it goes all the way across the page generally. Then we end up with our information, our articles in columns, and they're broken into different elements. So let's pretend that these are two different news stories, and I have one that's running wide on this side and one that's running narrow on this side. And they're broken into different pieces. So for example here, this might be my photo, and then my headline, and then the text here. The text would probably be divided into two columns. So I could take this and cut it in half to mimic the column effect. But look what happens if I put this in a column. I need to space that out so that you can tell it's two separate pieces, and now this piece is too big. So whenever I'm separating things, I'm actually having to make the pieces smaller because I need my white space in the middle. So here, where you can see my table behind the cardstock is the white space that's integral to the design. It's really important stuff. And I can move things around within this. Say I want my headline above the photo. Okay, I can move the photo down. I can put the headline at the top, but I'm still going to keep that same amount of white space in between all my elements. On this side, I have a narrow piece, and let's say this is the headline, and I have a small photo, and then I have text that starts here and will start narrow and then come into a wide column, because see, this column is essentially the same size now as each of these columns, right? And because this photo doesn't take up the whole width, I just have a little narrow bit of text here that brings you into the wider column, and the white space that surrounds all of those different elements would be the same width. Then when I get to the very bottom of the page, I normally have an element that goes all the way across again. It'll probably have the page number somewhere. The page number might be at the top, depending on the way your newspaper is designed. And this might even be an advertising strip that's sold to the newspaper sponsor, or it might be the weather report. It just depends on where you live. But no matter what information they choose to put on the front page, it's usually the same concept of a design of wherever I am, I'm going to be, when I divide things up, I'm always going to put the same amount of space in between them. So with this sort of graphic look, it's really important to get all your spacing exactly right. So if you really like graphic styled scrapbooking, you want to take a notion from that and try and get all of your your spaces, your gutters, really, really even. And a really easy way to do that is to cut a few pieces of 12 by 12 cardstock down into strips so that you can physically measure and make sure they're all the same width. So if I have this piece that I've measured and cut with my trimmer, and I know that that's the same width I'm going to use for everything, then I can start with one element. I can place my spacer, and then I can adhere the next one, and I'm just never putting adhesive on the spacer. So then when I pull the spacer out, I know that that gap will be the same as when I do the next piece. Does that make sense? So that sort of white space will help keep a graphic look very, very clean. But there's also a problem that I can end up with trapped white space if I'm not careful on how I divide up this page. So let's go back to this long, skinny article where I had the smaller photo. Well, what happens if I just automatically had put all my text and it fit in the wide part of this box? So I come back and I take off that skinny part of the column. And now I have all my text here. Here's my photo and here's my headline. And now I have this giant gaping hole in the middle of the newspaper. And that doesn't work. Our eye would naturally go to that on the front page of the newspaper and say, you left something out. Something is missing here. Either this picture should have been bigger, you should have had text there, you could have run a byline there with the author's name if you really needed to fit something into the space. But if you left this big space empty and it was just the bare newsprint without anything printed on top of it, it was just that paper, as soon as you look at it, you would think something is wrong here. That's the kind of white space that we want to avoid. That's trapped white space. Now, in a newspaper design, it's still probably going to look awkward even if you do this and you move the picture over to here. In a magazine design, most magazines take news magazines and put them aside. If you think of things like fashion magazines or decor magazines or anything like that that's just a bit softer than hardcore news, you'd probably be able to get away with something like this. And in fact, you'd probably balance it by doing something like having a smaller element on this side. And then depending on the magazine, there might even be some sort of freehand flourish in those gaps. So the thing to learn from that is that the more artistic you want to take the page, the less boxy it needs to be. Please don't let that sound like graphic design doesn't require some sort of artistic value. It very, very, very much does. But if you can allow me to just use the words graphic to describe things that are really, really boxy and even, and artistic to describe the kind of idea that it's not all going to fit in a square. Just for this one example, just so that you can understand what I mean by the two terms, that would be brilliant. So the more artistic you want to take it, the more elements that you can take into different sizes and add different pieces and different shapes and mess with these spaces. But it's always going to work best if the white space is not trapped. So say I make this piece that length, then I might make this one a little bit shorter too. So this would never ever work for a newspaper, but it could work for something more freestyle like a magazine layout. And so this is where we get with scrapbooking design, because we can have any style on that spectrum, from the very, very graphic to the very, very artistic, and a lot of us are somewhere in the middle. So we start to arrange things in different ways, and in fact we tend to layer things on top of each other and all sorts of good things like that. Here's the last thing before I go on to a real page that I want you to keep in mind, and that's that sometimes the trapped white space then happens because we try too hard to fill the whole 12 by 12. So if this were my page, and it doesn't matter that it's not a square, say that I had this much on my layout, but my page ended up here. I'm sorry, this is you're having to kind of think creatively today, but I really do think that this is the most concrete way to imagine it in your head and get a good feeling for it. So I have all this space left on my page. There might be a tendency to take my title, which of these could be my title? How about the middle-sized one? and say, oh, well, I have my title. I want to fill all this space, so I'll just put it here in the middle. And now my title is in the middle, and that's awkward because if I have all these pieces that are quite close together, but I still have a lot of space up here, I can either have purposeful white space that I meant to leave open, or I can have this space where I tried to place something in the middle and now I haven't left it open. So I have two options with this extra box. I could bring it right down here and even maybe overlap it so that I have all these pieces that are together, and if I'm going to have them all connected, I might have them all overlap, or I might have lots of them with different spacing. But the matter is that the title should either be down here with everything, or it should be right up at the edge, because then I've made a purposeful choice to leave this space open. I haven't gone, oh, I can't make up my mind. Should it be close or should it be far away? I'll just put it in the middle. When I put it in the middle, that weakens my entire design. So that's a little theory for you today. And now I'm going to try and show you that same concept as it's applied to scrapbooking, because I'm going to make a layout and take you through my process of figuring out the good and the not so good white space as I create a page. Now, for my supplies today, I am using two ranges that are brand new to the store. Glitz Designs has some gorgeous new collections that are in the shop now. There's 3 collections, and I'm using bits and pieces from 2 different collections, I think. One called Love You Madly, which could be a Valentine collection, but there are a lot of pieces in there that you could use year-round. And one called Uncharted Waters, which is gorgeous and a little different to anything I've ever seen really in scrapbooking. So that's what a bunch of these die cuts are from. Some of the die cuts are even like things that you might want to frame or put on the wall. They're really, really pretty. I love this cloud frame, and all these pieces come apart so you could use it as accents even if you put photos behind there on the same page. And there's a beautiful, this is my challenge. I'm not going to use this today, but I love this die cut. I know that some of you are going to think like, are whales the new owl motif? And maybe they are. I have no idea. I really don't have a big bowl of die cuts that are all owl shaped. But there's this motif in the line that has a whale with a banner that says choose happiness. And I just think it's very different. And if it's the new owl, then we'll see lots of whales next season. But I'm not sure what page I'm going to put it on, but I like it. So anyway, that's included in there. But I'm going to use some pieces that are not the whale today. And these little mini letter stickers in gray are also from Glitz, and these are the stickers. I think these are called title stickers. Yeah, so these are the big stickers. This die cut is from that same pack too, and I'm going to use that. And then these are different, and these are a bit of a splurge. I'll admit, these are not the cheapest embellishments I've ever picked from the store. And that whale is there again. But these, instead of being brads or little rhinestones or something like that, these are giant rhinestones. I wonder if you can see them better if I take them out. So they're not like the old epoxy that was just a plain dome over the top. They're faceted with the design behind, and I think there's a set in each collection, so there's all different themes available. I just picked up the one from Uncharted Waters, but they're really bold. They're quite thick and domed on the page. I think they're going to make a real statement. So if you're looking for something that would just kind of shake up your embellishments a little bit, I think these are a good choice, but definitely a tiny splurge. Okay, and then also some LE Studio. Now, you probably know LE Studio from things like this, and these are some of the new die cuts. But exciting times. LE Studio have now released their first 12 by 12 papers. There are 2 collections in the shop. One of them is a kind of, here's the more lovey-dovey collection called You and Me. But again, it's a Valentine range that you could use all the time. And I was really considering using this craft one with the hearts and the little polka dots, but I decided to go for another of the craft designs, which is from this collection, which is called Day to Day. So there's one that's kind of love themed and one that's a more everyday type line. So these are both from Day to Day. the red, and this red polka dot has tiny little script, or not script, but typewriter text, and it's the days of the week and things like that. So that's quite nice. But I'm going to use this craft chevron side for a little twist on my craft cardstock for today. And then I'm going to use this yellow print also from the Day-to-Day collection. So if you like their die cuts but would like something else, they now have paper, whole range of goodness there. And then also some paper from Uncharted Waters. Each of the New Glitz designs has full 12x12s that also come in 6x6 and 8x8 and has cut apart sheets. So I'm going to use some bits and pieces from this one. There's the whale again, but I'm not going to use the whale today. I promise you I'm going to, though, because I like the whale. Okay, the reason I picked this one, everything else I've chosen is a little more graphic, and this one is a bit more collage style. But I really wanted to bring some aqua into my color scheme today, so craft and yellow and then aqua, and we'll see what other little accents I end up throwing in there. There's going to be this gray, but the gray is a little bit toward the blue. And so I don't think I know I'm not going to use the whole 12x12, but I really wanted to cut apart some of this and use that aqua and ombre kind of look there. So those are my supplies, and I have 2 4x6 photos, but I know that I'm going to use one at the whole 4x6. So this one's going to be a 4x6 as is. And originally I thought I would use both together like this, but I had a photo that's misleading. I know this is a little tangent from white space, but I wanted to mention this in case you have photos like this. If you look at just this photo on its own, it looks like we were hiking in some sort of forest or jungle. Maybe jungle is closer to where we were, but these 2 photos were taken literally about 5 steps apart. So all this greenery is really the sort of stuff that you see at the side of the waterfall, and what we were doing was climbing up a mountain where each level of the mountain had another waterfall. And just because there's so much water, obviously you get a lot of greenery growing around the edge. But I find this to be a misleading photo because this makes it look like we were somewhere that was more like a forest, and it was definitely more like some sort of tropical rainforest, if a forest at all, and very much everything was water. We were following the water the whole time. So I'm going to use just part of this photo because I do really like the fact that you can see what it looked like, that I'm struggling to keep up on the path, that my view is always, that he's a few steps ahead, and that I'm always looking at his backpack and things like that. And I like how this photo has the path leading up, and then you can't see the path any further. So I'm going to use a die cut frame and make this into a smaller picture. And I'm just going to bring it down so that I still get that leading line of the frame, and he's still in the picture. His head's not cut off or anything. But now when I put this next to this and all of this is gone, it's not going to be so misleading. So it will hopefully fit a little bit more and not confuse your eye so much to see one thing that looks like a waterfall and one thing that looks like a forest. Here's my first choice when I need to start thinking about how I want to use the white space on my page. I've taken my first 4x6 photo and placed it in the corner of the pattern paper that I'm going to use as a photo mat. So I know I just want this edge to show, and then I'm going to cut the same around the other side. But I also wanted to bring in the aqua, so I cut a piece of that pattern paper to 4x6 as well, and I'm going to have it share a mat. So I'm essentially doing exactly what I would normally do with my second photo, but because I've cut my second photo down to that smaller size, I wanted to have that space to bring in the aqua in the color scheme. Now, I have 2 choices here. I can either place them absolutely together, so there's no gap in the middle, or I can space it out to provide about the same amount of spacing in between the 2 photos as the space that's shown around the edge. If I wanted to make this amount different than the edge, then it needs to be dramatically different. So I need to do something like move it way over and then have embellishment that's over the top. But what I personally like is to have them right next to each other so that this reads as all one unit. I know that many of you will prefer to have some sort of a gap here, but in that case, I would suggest that you try to keep the gap in between as close to the same size as the gap around the edge, and that follows that same design technique that's used on the front page of a newspaper. So you can do either, but it's just really useful if you are making a purposeful choice that will then It'll then lead you to some other choices that you're going to make throughout your page. So from here, I'm just going to get the other two sides cut as close to the same exact size as the existing margin as I can, so that I have a nice even edge all the way around. When it comes to adding this to my background, I could place it directly in the middle and try to get the spacing all the way around the edges to match up. However, it can't really be done because this element is a rectangle where the background is a square. So my space around the edge is never going to be equal on all four sides. So that makes it a little easier to just purposely place it off center. And in truth, you can go in any direction, but trying to place it center is always going to be just ever so slightly unpeaceful to the eye. It's going to be a little bit awkward because your eye is going to want to balance the four sides, and it can't because this is a rectangle and that's a square. So what I do is tend to take my element and place it over the center and then move it out in on the diagonal in any direction that I want to work with. So today I think I'll move it up to here perhaps, and actually in this case I don't then like those two little points that I get there, so I'll just move it a little bit down until I'm happy with it, and then I'll hold it in place when I've got it straight and add my adhesive. Now I also know that I'm going to bring in that second photo, and here's where I start using that white space idea again. If I wanted to spread the photo out here, I'd have a lot of space left in the middle, even though it's not this background page that's viewable in there. It's just going to be a really awkward gap unless I'm putting something here. Maybe my journaling's going to go there, my embellishment's going to go there, my title's going to go there. In that case, it would work perfectly, but if I just leave it as plain paper in between the two, it has the potential to become awkward space. So I'm better off if I bring this piece closer to my other photo, even though that means I'm going to cover up some of the color that I brought in. So what I want to do is kind of make a compromise. I don't want to cover all the aqua because I want some of it to show. So I look at other places where I can line up things to make them work. So here's a vertical line in that die cut frame, and here's a vertical line in the matted photo and paper. What I look to do is line them up so that they are not all exactly in the same place, but ever so slightly one direction or the other. So if I bring it, so the turquoise line is inside the paper, I have a smaller gap here. If I take that turquoise line and I move it out a little bit so that it's just past the yellow, then I have a bigger gap here. And I think because this pattern is paper, this paper is patterned even, and it has some different little elements here that I could use in the embellishment, I think I can go ahead and leave it on the outside and bring in a little bit of something. So you might see those rhinestones or some stickers end up around here. If you're somebody that would want to keep it more plain, then I would suggest bringing it in so that this space is smaller, because this amount of space doesn't really read like it needs much more on top. So that is my thinking process while I'm trying to place all the different elements. And again, I haven't tried to make these two pieces balance. They're purposefully different enough that you can tell I did it on purpose. If I had it in the center but was just ever so slightly off, if your eye goes to measurements, it's going to say, you didn't get that centered. So I'd rather put it off center on purpose so that you don't think that it's just that I have poor or lazy measurement. Instead, it's a choice to place it there. So now I have my most important elements on the page, and I start to think about the other embellishments I want to add in. I have a few larger elements. I cut out this ampersand and this journaling card, and then I have some smaller embellishments like these little pieces. This I cut from one of the 4x6 cards. And I quite like this large sticker here, which might go well at the bottom of the page if I can get the color to work in a good balance there. So this is where I start to just kind of move things around and see what will work in the space. So this piece I chose because it brings that color and that kind of scalloped pattern back in. But what I also don't want is for it to just look like that's the same exact piece of paper. So I'd rather move that around. This one is yellow and provides a little bit more contrast. So if I'm going to place something in this corner, it might be this. So here's a place where that spacing will come into play. I can work with this space where it's white and the turquoise line because these are all different elements. But look, now I have some of this craft coming through here in this gap, which if I'd had gaps everywhere else would be perfectly fine. But because I don't have any gaps anywhere else, then it looks awkward. So that means I can either bring this piece in, or I can add another element either underneath or on top to cover up that gap so that you don't see the background paper in between those two pieces. That's pretty much how I tend to work with it. So I might take this arrow and put it right over the top. And now you don't see that gap in the that space that was just there and nowhere else. But now I've got kind of a lot going on over in this part of the page. I need to kind of bring some things up here. So now I seem to have brought in quite a lot of yellow there, so it seems like I should bring in some yellow elsewhere. Maybe in here. And here's another case where I could place this underneath or even on top so that all the layers are touching, or I could separate it. But so far I haven't separated anything, so it doesn't make sense to separate something by just a small amount. If I wanted a gap there, I'd be better off to take it right to the top of the page so that there's no question that this gap was left on purpose. But I think in this case I'm going to leave it underneath here. At the point where I have a game plan, but I don't have everything attached, I have all the background flat elements attached. So nothing that's going to go on pop dots, nothing that's dimensional, and nothing that's not paper in some way. So I still have things that are not glossy on top or plastic or anything like that. This is when I start to look for places where I might want to fill some of the space with other elements that could add a little bit of texture. And in today's layout, that's going to be some droplets of gold color shine mist, a little bit of kind of a pale, well, a dull yellow washi tape, and this new little gadget which just arrived from Glitz, which is a roller stamp. Now they've brought these out in several different designs in small and large. So this is the small set, or the small roller size, and this particular one is a roll of teeny tiny little cameras. So I'm going to try it with a couple different brown inks because I just want it to fade into the background. So I'm going to use some ink that will be pale and some ink that will be a little bit more obvious. So I'm starting with my Distress ink, which is the same brown that I use around the edge. And to ink it, you're just going to roll it over the ink pad so that you can see that all the little spaces are covered. So I'm just going to, you can roll in either direction as long as you're holding it the right way. And it just gives you those little shapes, and they're going to fade as you run out of ink. So you can overlap them and create a little bit of a freestyle kind of shaded ombre type look. And I know that I'm going to have that that banner piece here. So I'm going to come down to the bottom here. And then I'm going to do some droplets of gold. The Mr. Huey eyedropper to do a few that are a bit more dramatic. And while that's drying, I'll get all my other elements inked around the edges, and by the time I'm all inked and ready to go, everything here should be dry and ready to put the next layer on top. Jumping around a little differently than normal just to really focus on the different things that involve spacing on the page. So now I've added some lettering in, and I've added all that washi tape and placed the rest of my embellishments pretty much where I want them to go. And what I did was, when I started adding this washi tape, it said choose happiness, and I used it 3 times in a diagonal line so that that color and pattern would repeat on the diagonal. And I just decided that there was an angle I could take in the journaling that would use that choose happiness concept. And I'd started with this ampersand here, not really knowing why I was going to use the and. I just really liked the design of it. And so I decided that I would go ahead and make that part of the title and use the ampersand. So I've now spelt out the title with small letter stickers here so that it runs into the ampersand and then turns and follows up this side. It's a little different than what I would normally do, and it doesn't follow every single rule of white space, because now I do have this gap here that has space in between the title and the photo with just minimal embellishment here, and I'm not going to add a lot more embellishment in between. But what I wanted to do was to show you so that you could see without having to try it yourself and then get angry and decide to tear the page apart because you weren't happy with it, that this will either look nice or odd to your eye. And it's completely up to you which you prefer. And it's completely fine if this now looks very strange, and even once I've finished, because I am going to add some things here and I'm going to add in my journaling. And so it may balance out and you may still come to like it, or you may go, why on earth did you run the title up the side? And I'm absolutely fine with you thinking either, but I wanted to demonstrate this for you so you could see how much the spacing really does play into the way that we see a page. So at this point, I had made one choice with the letter stickers that's different than everything else I'd done, because every other element here was touching. They were all overlapped. But with the letter stickers, although they overlap other elements on the page, they don't overlap each other. There's a space in between every letter, and then there's a larger space where there's a space in between the words. And I did the same thing with both these small letter tiles and the large letter tiles. And I'm pretty much sure that once I crop the photo of this layout, when it's all done and load it into the gallery, it'll get cut off on this side. But I don't know if you can tell from the video or not, but please take my word that there is a very narrow little edge of the pattern paper that runs along the side of these letters. They're not flush to the edge. There's just a tiny little bit to bring them in. So there is spacing that goes all the way around them. And basically, that's another choice. You could choose to put all your letter tiles together and push them together like you would on a Scrabble board. It's kind of a choice. When you put your Scrabble tiles on the board, do you put them all together or do you space them out individually? I prefer my letter tiles when I'm using stickers to have a little gap in between each letter, and I just find it's easier to read that way. And some letters, in some alphabets, some different stickers, now these two, they're all consistent. Sometimes the letters are different heights. Each sticker is a different size box, and in that case, when you run them all together, it's very difficult to get it right if there's no gap in between, and the gap in between gives you that little bit more freedom to move them up and down and have it look quite natural. So, but now, so that's a little bit of white space that's quite useful, but I have given myself some boxes of bad trapped white space here that I need to figure out. I have this space here, and I have space here. I do still need to add in my journaling, especially now that I've chosen this esoteric title that I need to kind of figure my way out of. And esoteric titles are probably something for a whole nother adventure. So let's just suffice to say that I will make that choose happiness and follow the path title make sense in the journaling. But I do have some trapped space here, if you can spot this. Now, it's not the background color, but it's pretty close. And it's just where I have all these different word elements, but then I've boxed in this piece of plain, and I'd really rather there be something else here. This is where word stamps come in really handy. So I'm just going to look for another word stamp. I have so many different word elements here that I'm not worried about overdosing on words. I think I've already done that. So it's okay for me to just throw more words in. So as long as I can find a word that will fit here and match the same sort of feel of the different words that I put on the page, then I can add that into this gap. But what else could I use if I didn't want to use word stamps? Well, this would be a great place for another little strip of washi tape. I could put a row of little gems here. I could even just take more ink and splatter a bit more ink in that gap, and that would fix this spot and have it just be a little bit more restful to the eye. I'm going to go ahead and add in my writing so that I make sure I have room for everything, and then I'm going to come back and work with this large space that's left at the bottom of the page. With my writing in place, and I added just a little bit more, I brought in a little bit of red, which was the back of one of the just offcuts of paper that I'd already used to bring in those little gaps that I had there. Pretty much everything is done now except this big empty space at the bottom. And I'm saving that for last because I wanted to show you one last thing about spacing and how you can use it against what you've already set up. So everything here is very layered. Everything is kind of, even elements like this, the journaling goes around the corner and fits into the gap. So everything's kind of a bit puzzle pieced but overlapping. So things are all put together very closely, overlapped, so that everything has no question that it all belongs together. It's all been put together and there's no big awkward spaces. But I do have this space here. Now, when you have lots of elements that you've put together, you can then make one choice to decide if another area of the page is going to be connected or disconnected. And disconnected doesn't necessarily mean that it's a poor design choice. It just means that it's a purposeful design choice if you want it to work to its best. So in this case, there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of different detail and it's really busy. If I kept layering into this bottom section, it's going to get even harder to see all the different pieces. I want to have one element of my page that's just a little bit of a calming influence. So I had a look through the sticker sheet and there was this one that I had chosen at the beginning that I really liked. The quote is a good fit for what I've written and for the pictures and everything like that. And the text, it's probably hard to see in the video, but these stickers, the gold print is metallic. It's not overly shiny, just the right amount. So I cut it out from this sticker sheet so that I could place it here and see what it would look like without having to stick it to the page and commit. And here's where I have this choice. If I wanted to follow the same rule I've used so far, I should tuck it underneath and overlap so that this builds on. And if your style is really lots of layers that fill the full 12 by 12, then that would be the good choice for you. If you tend to come somewhere else on that spectrum and you want maybe a lot of detail in part of the page, but also some part of the page that's a little bit more calm, then make this choice to spread this element out. So I now have that gap in between, which I don't have anywhere else. But because I'm doing it on purpose, I'm making sure that the gap's going to be the same in the two sides, and it's just this one element, and then I don't have anything else really that follows that. It's the exception to the rule. It will become more obvious that I did it on purpose and will create a little bit of balance to what is otherwise quite a chaotic design. So I'll go ahead and pull this sticker off from the backing. I'll use my ink to give it that same continuity as everything else because I don't want it to be too jarring. I don't want to have every rule broken on this. I just want to break that one rule that I've set up. So everything else will be overlapped, but this one will have white space to spread it apart from the rest of the page just enough that it catches your eye and provides a little bit of calm. And I don't need to add any more embellishment to the page at all. That's plenty to embrace this gap. These spaces now look like they're there on purpose and they're not just left and I haven't just forgotten about them. The coloring of my embellishment makes sure that I have different places where I have both the yellow and the turquoise plus this little shock of red so that I can follow that line on the diagonal across the page. And if I wanted to add more embellishment to go to this side, then my eye would get a little confused as to where it's meant to go. But because the red only appears on those three spots in a diagonal line, and that diagonal line takes you right across the photos, that means that it's going to be easy for you to see what you're meant to see, even though there's quite a lot going on. So that is a big Glitter Girl adventure in white space today. There's also material on white space in the Hitchhiker's Guide to Scrapbooking, which you can find here at 2 Peas in a Bucket if you're interested in looking at that in a little bit more depth. And I'll continue to mention it in other videos as I go, but I hope that answers your question. Now, your challenge for this week is to upload a project where you've created a layout this week and you're looking purposefully at the choices you're making with white space. It might be that your page will look nothing like this and you might have one area of embellishment and lots of white space. Or you might have a very blocky design, but you've purposely gone through that graphic look and made sure that all your gaps are nice and evenly spaced or proportional. And it doesn't matter which style or technique, everything is welcome, but we'd really, really appreciate it if in the comment box you describe what choice you made and why, and that will really, really help us create that kind of a gallery of different examples that represent different styles. And I hope that you enjoy thinking about space as you work on your pages this week. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.
Join us next week for the continuing adventures of Glitter Girl and the ongoing mystery of the scrapbooker behind the mask at twopsinAbucket.com.